I think there's an awful lot keeping CMOs awake at night, to be honest. But this is probably one of them, yeah. I've certainly noticed, even within our own business, there's a directive of, we need to leverage AI.
There's no research in the world that would say people that want to save money on car insurance will engage with a toy meerkat.
But I think that is a danger, right? One of the biggest dangers was job displacement. So if we were getting the starting point creative from AI, you're kind of taking out a layer of people that do that and are very good at it.
And 46% of consumers worry that brands and values missions are false. That's interesting. So half of consumers just don't believe even brands anymore.
Well, there's probably some truth in that. I mean, you'll tell us, Robin.
Welcome to Embracing Marketing Mistakes, the podcast where we help you learn how to grow your brand by understanding the mistakes and lessons from the world's top marketers. I'm Chris Norton, and today's guest is Robin Smith, Head of Corporate at Censuswide, an international market research consultancy based in London. Robin joins us to discuss Censuswide's first Voice of the CMO report, which reveals the biggest challenges and opportunities facing modern marketers, from AI-driven creativity to the dangers of brand backlash. Robin helps us unpack the data and looks at the trends shaping the future of marketing and why market research is at the heart of making informed strategic decisions. We dive into why choosing a reputable research partner is essential, the surprising insights around AI's role in marketing, and how to balance creativity with hard data to drive impactful campaigns. Whether you're struggling to measure marketing impact or navigating today's fast-paced AI landscape, this episode is full of actionable advice. So, as always, sit back, relax, and let's hear how you can leverage robust market research to avoid brand backlash, build creativity, and stay ahead in 2025. Enjoy. Welcome to the show, Robin Smith. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Robin, why don't you tell us a little bit about, you're from Censuswide, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and how long you've been doing it?
Yeah, no problem at all. So Censuswide is a 360 market research consultancy. We help agencies and brands with their market research. That's anything from content creation, market research, the sort of thing you'll see in press releases, white papers, all the way through to kind of brand focused research, brand health, brand testing. And we also do kind of creative testing, message testing. So anything within the research realm really will help with. I've been there about a decade now, so just under a decade, 10 years. I've seen a lot of change. I think I was the sixth member to join in the account management team. And that was back in 2015, I think, early 2015. And about 5 years into that, we spotted a bit of a gap in the market for B2B research. When I first started, it was very much kind of red top, who likes brown bread, who likes white bread, national Brit stuff, the red top kind of coverage. I think as a person, I wasn't ever particularly interested in that sort of story. And then this opportunity for B2B research came along and we ran with it. So now I've got a team of 10 within the overall team, and we focus on corporate industries. So financial services, professional services, technology, legal, and a smattering of others as well.
And roughly, how much does a piece of research cost before we get into the report? Like, how much, if you wanted to do, 20 questions, 500 people, specific sector, you mentioned legal there. We've got a couple of legal clients. So if we had a legal client, we want to do 500 lawyers in the UK, how much would that cost to do that sort of research, roughly? 20 questions.
Great questions. Thank you. Thank you for putting me on the spot as well. It would probably be somewhere between £5,000 and £15,000, and that will be dependent on the type of respondent. You mentioned their lawyers. We could be specific as general counsel. Within that, we can be just financial services, just large corporates. The number of respondents, 500, nice and robust there, definitely based off that. But we could go all the way down to 100, and you could still get some really good research from that, I would say. And also the length of interview. How many questions do you want to ask them? But I think the range I've given you there for one country is probably about right.
And I'm quite interested. How do you actually, I kind of understand the consumer research landscape a bit better. Often that's done via online surveys and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
As I understand it. When it comes to a more niche B2B audience, are these people already on your panel, or do you kind of actually seek them out and do telephone interviews? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. They do absolutely exist on a network already. That's the easiest way to recruit them. The reason they sign up is they get incentivized for their time, but also we give them a protected process. So if they sign up and say, I'll answer a survey once a quarter, they know they're not going to be hounded outside of that every week for their opinions. But actually it helps because that means we can send them links, online surveys. What we'll do is ask them to book in a time to actually answer it. So it's a little bit more structured than just sending it out to, a NAP rep sample, nationally representative sample. But also we do leverage telephone interviews. So if it's, C-suites of large corporates in a single sector, that's quite hard. We'll book in time to talk to them a bit like we are now. We'll ask the questions as if it is an online survey, but the interviewer will input their answers and it proceeds that way. So we also do qualitative research. So we can take that a step further. Imagine you and I right now are having a conversation about bigger themes, not just questions 1 to 10, but, what are your thoughts on digital assets and what's happened in the last week? So a bit more open, the more colourful responses you'll get from that.
And how senior can you get? I mean, I think a lot of people will be listening to this thinking, wow, I can get in front of, chief execs. Does your panel go right up to that level of seniority?
Absolutely does. Yeah. I mean, the report we'll dive into with CMOs, 500 CMOs in the UK. So, and that's just within marketing. We are regularly polling C-suite generally, CFOs, quite sought after. But then again, industry specific, we can go CIOs, and that's actually chief investment officer. So for financial services. Equally, if you take it back to the technology sector, CIO is chief information officer. We then have subsections of that, CISOs, so the people that are information officers but in charge of security. So we can be really, really specific. When we were building out the B2B team, the team I run, the aim was to go after and collect audiences that were sought after but not necessarily easy to access at that point. And so in the last sort of 7 years, we've really invested an awful lot to build out that capability, both quantitative research and qualitative research as well.
Okay, so can we dive into the voice of the CMO? So that's the reason we've got you on here is we spotted the report and started reading it. And I was like to Will, we should definitely get somebody on the show. So you've got yourself on to come and talk about the different themes that are identified. So the report is 500 CMOs in the UK, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so 500 CMOs in the UK, and we've both read it. There's some interesting things that come out. What do you think are the most interesting themes that you found when you did it with CMOs in the UK?
I think the willingness to say how adoption is going with AI. I think it was 99%, almost 100% statistically speaking, of people said, in some form or another, their organization has adopted AI. Now, there is obviously some subjectivity to that. They might mean, there's a back office worker that puts emails into ChatGPT. But I think actually it's probably not that. It's probably a bit more formal. It's in their structured workday. So I found that interesting. And then digging into that slightly further, I think about 2/3 of them were sort of enthusiastically with open arms adopting AI.
62%. Yeah,
indeed. So about 3 in 5. That other 2 in 5 are still hesitant, approaching it with caution. It's not really about me, but I think that's probably where I'm at as well. That cautious, yes, we need to adopt, yes, we need to proceed with, but we need to do so with immense caution.
Yeah, the fact that everybody's embracing technology was fascinating to me. Like all CMOs are doing it. It did say that 43% say AI makes their marketing processes more creative, compared with 21% who find it a hindrance. 21% find it a hindrance. I suppose more creative. There's a big argument over whether using AI does make you more creative, or because obviously it takes away a lot of the process stuff. But this is about marketing. It says 43% say AI makes their marketing process more creative. So I suppose process, yes, but content, no. What do you think, Will?
Well, yeah, that grabbed me. That one, and also the 97% have got specific concerns about the use of AI. So while 2/3 are embracing it, a lot are still concerned. I mean, what are the concerns that you found in the study? Then, was it specific things people were worried about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right on the front end. And again, there's a bit of subjectivity here, but it's making processes more creative as probably like a starting point. We're going to have a creative session. here's the client, here's the objective for the campaign. Leaning on AI to get some form of starting point and then taking that on is probably what they mean, is what they're referring to in terms of that creativity. But I think that is a danger, right? One of the biggest dangers was job displacement. So if we were getting the starting point creative from AI, you're kind of taking out a layer of people that do that and are very good at it. And then I think there's a massive fear in, 2, 3, 4 years that we just have campaigns that are underpinned by AI, or at least started by. And companies in the same sector, let's take 2 law firms, are just churning out AI-generated campaigns. And then all of a sudden, everyone stops listening because they know it's AI-generated. It's just nonsense firing off at each other. You lose that human touch. Fascinatingly, the other aspect of AI that marketers are leveraging is the personalization of it, is being hyper-targeted, even down to kind of website layouts, but also, their content, blogs. But in some sense, they'll lose that hyper-personalization if they just start all of their creative with AI, and definitely if they get it to write their content for them. So I think that, going back to what we said about proceeding with caution, those are the concerns. We're at this fascinating point at the moment where people haven't fully adopted it in the mainstay. In the marketing departments, I'd say that's a fair characterization. And so they don't really know how to proceed, how to deal with these concerns. And that comes into part of a bit of the other report said about skills and upskilling people. They're looking for people to come in with some experience of AI, because the existing team, and definitely CMOs who have been in their careers for 25 plus years, don't really know anything about it, let alone how to leverage it.
So it's fair to say it's a high priority in right. Is it keeping CMOs awake at night, or is it just on their long list of things to think about?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot keeping CMOs awake at night, to be honest. But this is probably one of them. Yeah. I've certainly noticed, even within our own business, there's a directive of we need to leverage AI, but there's not always a direction behind that. So a CMO might be told to leverage AI, but they don't. It's up to them to then go and discover that. They're in a discovery phase, then they have to implement it, they need to hire accordingly. And I think that's incredibly difficult to do when you've still got to do your day job and you've still got to hit those KPIs and objectives that were set out 12 months ago.
So it says here as well, nearly half, 46% of consumers believe it's important to share their values and missions of the brands they buy. But the same proportion, 46% of consumers worry that brands and values, missions are false. That's interesting. So half of consumers just don't believe even brands anymore.
Well, there's probably some truth in that. I mean, you'll tell us, Robin, but it feels like, being a values-led organization feels like the right thing to do in 2024. And while I'm sure a lot of brands are values-led for the right reason, probably some are paying lip service to the idea of being values-led. Is that something you've seen come out in the report, or is that your insights?
Yeah. I think that's definitely fair to suggest. It was kind of an arms race to meet that expectation of consumers, to ensure all of a sudden that you had to, have some sort of form of ESG, otherwise they wouldn't buy. You had to meet, any cultural movements, and there's an awful lot of opposing cultural movements going on at any one time. And so brands are amazingly wary of this. I think 92% of the CMOs said they fear backlash. That's one of their biggest fears. And interestingly, a good proportion of them, I think about 40%, 2 in 5 CMOs said it's stifling creativity. But we're not prepared to do, the stuff in the 80s and 90s, the really kind of out there, risky advertising, marketing and comms. I'm not saying all of it was successful. I'm not saying all of it was good, but at least there's something in punchy comms. They're actually not willing to take that risk anymore out of fear of backlash.
Well,
sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, well, let's dig into that, because that was one of the findings we found really interesting. The fact that there's an awful lot of brands having to deal with backlash, and something like 47% had to deal with it. 20% are worried about it. And what was quite interesting is, if I've read this correctly, B2B brands were more susceptible to it than B2C brands, which I found quite surprising. Tell us about that.
There is definitely experience of that. I can't name names, but some of the research we've done, both quant and qualitative, big financial services organizations, going back to ESG, and I apologize because, like AI, it's one of those terms that was, battered away at, and then actually I think we're coming out the other side of that. But there was a big call for that, definitely in FS, and the concerns were, and these were from customers, but these people were kind of fund managers, these professional investors, portfolio builders. Their concern was that people were just coming out with ESG blogs, content, some funds carelessly put together just to tick that box and move on, and then hoping that you'd still continue to buy their mining and their weaponry and those sorts of funds, the big, dangerous, nasty ones, tobacco. So was it a box ticking exercise? And so I think they probably do care more because there's almost an intellectual dishonesty to it. You're not fooling me. I know what you're doing with this policy. Whereas in the consumer sphere, perhaps people are a little more forgiving. You definitely see on social media, people jump on, this is what a disgusting oversight in this advert or this blog post or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the next week they'll buy the product because it's like a household item that they need or something. So I think there's, people will flare up more publicly to be heard, more aggressively perhaps. But then actually they're probably more forgiving and things move on quite quickly.
I know there's a lot of backlash on products and people getting cancelled. I've seen just last week, Jamie Oliver released a children's book, didn't he? He published I don't know if he released it, but just recently it's been covered that it was a children's book about a little Aboriginal girl in Australia, and then people in Australia from that community. And it was never. He says he was never meaning to cause any distress or harm or whatever. But it's upset that community that much that they've had to the publishers unpublished the book. So he's essentially had the product that he did it for cancelled. Which was it just shows you the power of social media and an uproar and an upset that people can have brands and products cancelled.
He doesn't have much luck, does he, Jamie Oliver? Do you remember a few years ago he dared to put chorizo into his paella recipe?
How dare he?
And he basically offended the whole of the Basque region, and there was this huge kind of like backlash. I mean, actually, it was great for him because suddenly his recipe gets goes number one in Google search. But
that's so interesting. I've forgotten that one, but I think there was also a kind of jerk chicken Caribbean recipe.
Yeah.
That again was this cultural appropriation call. He probably just needs to have a stern word with whoever his marketer is. Actually,
yeah, I'm sure it's not even. I mean, he probably doesn't even write these recipes, does he? That's the thing. That's the thing.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, he's probably got somebody who makes them for him. Yeah, exactly.
So just before we move on, the brand backlash then, is that brand backlash in the context of ESG, or is it brand backlash in general? Or are you saying, ESG tends to be, or in your view, tends to be the driver of much of this backlash?
Yeah, so the ESG point was what I've seen personally and from the kind of B2B world, those B2B marketers. ESG, I think, is less important for consumers in the consumer world. Again, some people will say it's massively important. Some people will say it's important, but it's not. So that was just an example of something I've seen firsthand with our work. I think brand backlash is with everything. And that's what makes it so difficult for marketers, is that it's not backlash from one angle. It's kind of anything you do goes under this microscope. Under this really critical lens from people from all different backgrounds, all different ages, different demographics. And so to please them all simultaneously is almost impossible, I would imagine.
And you shouldn't try to, because then you have incredibly beige communications, don't you, that doesn't really appeal to anyone.
Dull.
Exactly.
This is interesting. I thought B2B marketing only organizations are more likely, 62%, to use social listening tools to understand what customers want. So nearly 2/3 are using social listening on CMOs. That's quite interesting for us, isn't it?
Yeah, that interested me, Chris. I think we've been pushing social listening and insight for years, haven't we, at Prohibition? Probably 5-10 years ago, an awful lot of quite senior marketing people didn't even know what social media listening was. But probably if you think about our client set now, most of them do employ social listening in some capacity, don't they?
Maybe 10 years ago. I think 5 years ago, I think most people have, the market's commoditized itself. It's all merged together. There's fewer players, but they're all owned by similar brands, and you could name 5 off the top of your head. But I just think it's interesting that B2B is more likely to do social listening than B2C for CMOs out there.
And does research constitutes social listening as well, from your perspective?
We wouldn't. I think if a client came to us with a social listening brief, we'd build a research brief, but we'd want to add on using a partner that does it fully to make sure that we hit that objective. But I think with regards to the B2B world, I think it's indicative of how social media has changed how people consume over the last, as you said, 5-10 years, definitely 12 years, right? And we do a lot of these studies, persona work, learning how people digest information. Do they want short form video, long form? Is it blog post? But also like when they're doing it. And you'll notice, I'm a commuter now, sort of outside of London. When you're on the train, on the way in, on the way back, even people are emailing, but they are listening to podcasts. They are watching videos on LinkedIn. So people are digesting kind of outside office hours. And you're not necessarily going to do, the way you're going to do that is the social media aspect. It's the easiest to digest. And I think people are leveraging it really well. In the B2C world, they've been doing it for some time really well. I think the B2B world is kind of catching up. And again, you've got to keep that careful line of professional, but listenable and engaging. Bit like this podcast.
Yeah, the Radar statistics were just out, and I saw that the BBC is now has got 40% of the market share of broadcast. But it said, on average, a UK listener now listens to one podcast a week, which is like everybody is basically listening to podcasts. That's definitely changed in the last 2 or 3 years.
Oh, massively.
Since COVID, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think back to, was it 2003 podcasts? Is when the iPod came out, wasn't it? Around about when the iPod came out. But there's huge interest in the podcast, and then it just kind of dropped off a cliff, didn't it, for years?
Yeah, they were called audio downloads for a while because nobody knew what podcasts were, and the BBC had to go legally unbiased, so they called them audio downloads, but nobody knew what they were talking about.
So actually, I've got a stat from the report, which I must admit my heart sinks when I read a statistic like this. So 39% of CMOs are having to manage more activity, but with smaller budgets. And that's just kind of depressing to read that. So what else are they being required to do? And how are they getting around that? Are they just putting the pressure on their agencies? Are they making their team work longer hours? What's your view on that? Give us some insight into that statistic.
Definitely. I think we saw part of the report focuses on the skill gap and how they hire. And the budget for hiring is also tight. So what they're looking for is this impossible list of experience, even for kind of entry-level marketers, perhaps new grads that have just come out, having done a comms and marketing degree. They're looking for, creative skills. They're looking for technical skills. They're looking for some experience in market research, so that the sort of work that we do, product marketing, content marketing, social media, all of these things in one package. I think it still is in a lot of organizations, but they're kind of siloed roles. There should be one person for each of these, perhaps, if you've got enough budget, you're big enough, and you have a big enough team, so you can really do all of them justice. But I think increasingly people are having to come into, build these hybrid roles and then get people to come into these roles. It's great for experience, obviously. You come out with a plethora of skills, but it must be enormously tough to hire someone that's got all of that experience.
Yeah, because it did say that recruiting is a serious concern for CMOs, like recruiting talent, which for me, talent today in 2024, 2025 is it can be anywhere, can't it? People don't have to be in London city centre. They don't have to be, within the M25. They can live in Glasgow and work for a London brand So the talent thing's quite interesting. And then, like you just said there, the number one, it says, what are the key skills you're looking for? And 40% said creativity and innovation. So 40% were looking for creative people and 39% AI skills. God, that comes out all the time now.
Oh, I mean, AI has got to be the most in-demand skill. I mean, we had quite a few episodes ago, we were talking, I think it was with Andrew Bruce Smith. We were talking off camera about AI, and he was saying, if you do an AI degree, you can basically go to Silicon Valley and name your salary, and it's just in such demand, and there's so few. But I suppose from a kind of a graduate or an entry-level career perspective, even a basic grip on AI and its role in marketing is highly desirable, isn't it?
I think so. Absolutely. I feel that, you've got a traditional marketing department. There's this new hole to plug. And yeah, of course, you want to hire someone to plug it immediately. It's either that or upskill your existing. Then you need to go find courses, reputable courses. There's going to be lots of, people out there, cowboy courses, that sort of thing. So it's probably just easier to try and hire someone with that skill set. You made a good point about the budget as well. I think, this year we've noticed that as well. Just, some repeat projects being either downsized or, put off into new year budget. But in terms of hiring, I have noticed a couple of clients, a friend of mine as well, looking to kind of outsource staff. As you said, talent can be anywhere in the country, can be anywhere in the world as well.
Yeah.
And so, looking at markets such as South Africa, actually, where the time zone is the same or very similar depending on where you are, the labour costs and salaries generally are lower, but the talent is just as good, just as front foot forward, learning about AI. So I have noticed kind of people looking at those different options as well.
Yeah, we get approached for that, for talent recruitment in South Africa because of the cost benefit, and like you say, the time differences. That's definitely a thing, because I've seen quite a few people have approached us, particularly, do you want some PR talent in South Africa? It's like it's just not something I've ever considered, really, mainly because we focus on the UK.
Well, I think that's a point as well. If the role is location centric, then that's going to be quite difficult, I guess. I don't know how you bridge that gap. But yeah, it definitely is a thing. But
yeah, if you're doing global campaigns, you definitely consider it, because talent is talent. You want creative, inquisitive, people to work for you. That doesn't really matter where they are.
So on this, on the budget question, before we move on, have you been doing this CMO report for several years?
This is actually the first iteration.
Right. I was going to because I was going to say, it'd be interesting to track that. It becomes quite interesting when you repeat it year on year, isn't it? And you can start to look at these trends, because one would hope, there's more stability in the UK, inflation coming down, consumer spending's on the up. You'd hope those
taxes going up.
Yeah, taxes massively going up. You'd have, on balance, you'd hope those budgets would start to increase, because it's a bit disheartening, isn't it, to see CMO budgets constantly under pressure, because ultimately it gets to the point where you can't do a good enough job, I suppose, as a CMO if your budgets get cut too much.
Absolutely. To your point, this is the first iteration of what we hope is going to be many. We're going to do it every year. I think a lot of what we have in here is trackable. No doubt the themes will change slightly over time. Definitely the lens on it. AI's lens next year will be vastly different. Implementation we'd expect to be much higher. And hopefully we can get a bit deeper with how they've implemented it and the actual impacts and that sort of thing. We're going to do one in the UK, which is this one. We're going to do one in the US as well. So another market, and we're going to track that over time. We're awfully excited about that. In terms of budget, just going back to that point, I think this year, 2024, has been very difficult in that there's been, an election in every major economy almost. You just look at the state of the economy as of Tuesday last week with the new US election, with Trump coming back in. Obviously, we had our election. It's been, there's been two, global involvement conflicts going on. There's been other conflicts around the world as well. It's been a really tumultuous time. And I think definitely large organizations, global conglomerates have suffered that. Budgets will get cut when there's times of economic uncertainty. I don't think there's many years more uncertain than 2024, even though really the markets have been relatively positive until now.
So, fascinating insight into the CMO report. We'll get you to give it a plug at the end. So I'm sure those people that haven't heard about it will want to read about it in depth. Slight segue. This show is about fuck ups, and particularly those kind of mistakes we make in our careers that we learn from, and that's what we're really interested in. Now, from your perspective, then you've been at Censuswide sort of 10 plus years. No doubt you've had previous roles. Can you think of any kind of personal or professional mistakes you've made that have kind of taught you something incredibly important in your career? Anything you want to talk about? Get it off your chest, if you like.
Cathartic.
We've had a few exclusives on this when people have never mentioned it to anyone.
And then we had a podcaster came on here and he'd never talked. He had his own podcast, never talked about it, And then he talked about it with us and we just chatted it through. And he was like, afterwards, he messages and said, that was the most, I got it off my chest.
It was like therapy for him,
and then he asked us if he could use the episode and he put it on his own. He used the whole episode on his own podcast, which was quite a cool thing, really, wasn't it?
So no pressure.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything life-changing, but, you know.
Yeah, wow. We are constantly making mistakes, right? I think our job is quite process-led, so like they're not the most interesting mistakes with big creative campaigns going out that shouldn't. Have I sent the wrong reports to the wrong clients? Yes. The implication there obviously is actually massive because of data privacy and data protection. The learning from that is to just have a better eye to detail. But
don't do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do it again, or you won't have the opportunity to do it again, sort of thing. But I think myself and there's members in my team as well, I know have there's a lot of different documents we have to do when we're putting a project through, when we're getting the right people assigned to it, that sort of thing. But one of the documents goes to the accounts team and kind of defines what the project is, the expectations, the cost of it, but also the cost to us. And therefore kind of the profit within that, kind of lays it out in a nice itemized grid. And a couple of times that document's gone directly to the client when it should have gone to the accounting team. And you know what? I think indicative of how busy the people we work with are, it's very rarely been picked up on. We'll just get back in touch and say, just don't worry about that last document. We won't need to pay any attention to that. Here's the correct one.
Just don't recall the email because that then draws their attention to it, doesn't it?
Exactly. Like you need to keep it very above board. Oh God, that's a relevant, completely irrelevant document.
Yeah,
it definitely does have all the itemized costs in there for you and your name. So I know that's happened in the past. Yeah, I'll own up to it as well. I've definitely done it.
I think also when you get sent something like that, right, and say whoever is listening to this, every business out there is out to make a profit from what they do. They want to work with we want to work with great clients. We want to do great work. But we also, if we don't make any fucking profit, we're going to go bust. So we've got to make a profit. I think if you've got a supplier that's supplying you a service and you've agreed to you've agreed the price, I think it is quite awkward for yourself to get that and then go, shit, they're making $2,000 on that, or whatever it is. But actually, that's kind of expected because of the it's like when you go into a carpet store, right? Carpets are predominantly marked up at least 300-400%. So if you knew the price of a carpet, it's always marked up. So when they knock off 100% off this weekend at Will's Ockendon's carpet store, it's actually 200% still profit. You see what I mean?
And the old email to the wrong person, we've all done that, haven't we? I remember once once I got an email from a journalist when I was doing some media outreach, and I think it was I pitched the story to them, and then I got one immediately back saying, "This looks a bit fucking boring. It's up to you." And then I realised it was meant for their colleague, and they'd basically sent it back to me, critiquing the story. And then
this looks a bit fucking boring.
Yeah, and then I got
good feedback.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Took that on board.
Constructive criticism to a degree. There was an amazing one. It was actually an internal email, but two fairly senior stakeholders, and the guy who sent it, long gone. This was about 8 years ago in the business now, so he's moved on. But I think a request came through to him, and he wanted to forward it on to kind of his buddy. He sent it straight back to the person who made the request, just asking, "Is she dense?" Just straight back to her. So I think that wasn't me, luckily, but there are definitely learnings in anything like that as well. I would tend not to put an email. It's all too easy to do when you're first starting out, but I think as you go through and the responsibilities grow, and definitely as teams grow and look to you to set an example, that's a lesson you learn quite quickly, I think. And
if there's someone out there that's starting out in marketing, can I just say to you, be careful what you write on email, because it can be fine. That example you've just given there, Robin, where someone sends something, or Will's example, it's a bit fucking boring. I like that.
It was to be fair.
But then when you reply and to each other, right? Sometimes people reply. So you might send something. So Will might send something to you, Robin. You might go, "Thanks for this, Will. It's not fucking boring, and this is okay." And then you might forward that on to somebody else, and then they have a conversation going, "Robin, this is shit. It really is fucking boring." Then they'll send it to somebody else, and then it comes back to you, and then you go, "Oh, I've got some amendments here, Will. There you go." Will gets it, and it's got in the chain. Do you know what I mean? Further down, that's happened to loads of where it's like 5 emails.
I'll tell you what's dangerous is when you're responding on your iPhone, and I can never quite work out what the way it categorizes emails. It's really confusing, and I've a few years ago. This is a terrible confession, actually.
Go for it.
I was dealing with, we'll say, a partner agency, we'll say, and I stood on someone's toes, basically, and they sent me a bit of a shitty email, and I didn't respond for a few days. And then I forwarded it to the team and said, I don't know why I said this, looks like I've upset this fucker. And then immediately I got an out of office pinging back from the person I was talking about, and I realized I'd copied them in, but they're out the office. And there's nothing I could do, but I assume they just deleted it because they were out the office and they must have had hundreds of emails. Never got any comeback on it. But it
did you have a sleepless night?
I was a little bit concerned, yeah, but got away with it. It's the weekend. It's fine. I was all right. By Monday, I'd come to peace. I had peace with it.
I had in a previous agency. Someone told me a story of when a girl that used to work for me. She was an account manager at the time, and she told me she worked in a press office of one of the big 4 supermarkets. She worked in the press office, and there was about 8 of them in the press office, and she sent something to the team. And this other person said, and so the person that was telling the story, Amy, if you're out there, replied and went, but meant to send it to her mate. What a fucking dickhead. She doesn't know, all this sorts of stuff. Absolutely went to town on her because she was sending it to her friend. Clicked send, and then she heard it go, bing! And across the other side of the office. And she said, I literally went, and she went over and went, I didn't mean it. she said it was awful. She left the job not long after that.
Yeah, just don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right though, Robin. Don't, you shouldn't be putting that stuff in email, should you? That's the truth.
That's the moral of the story, kids.
I think it's the moral of the story, but also it's okay to have these feelings. Like, we're all human. Work is quite stressful. I think it's good to come out of it and vent sometimes. Just don't do it through official channels, definitely.
yeah.
Keep it for the pub.
I've upset this fucker. Yeah. I like that, Will.
Let's get back to B2B research for a moment. I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this thinking I could get more out of B2B research, and I think in the last few years it's kind of really developed, hasn't it? And obviously, service companies like your own are now getting access to this really kind of senior, high quality kind of panel. Something you said, actually, you need about 100 respondents as a starting point. Is that pretty much the minimum we would need to make research statistically robust, or could we have less respondents than that if we're talking qual research?
Yeah, it's a good question. It varies, I think, on various things, but I think the objective is important. If it's for media, it's basically what's going to be accepted by journalists, by those reading it, by peers, especially if there are some either concerning or surprising results. That needs to have some sort of foundation, strong foundation through numbers. So the easiest way to think about it really is the more general the audience, the larger the sample size you'll need. For like political polling, for national representative studies, for PR, 2,000 respondents, well weighted, well recruited, is plenty, is fine. If you're surveying, people in employment, it's a slightly smaller tranche, 1,000 you could get away with. And then if you go up the seniority chain to, those with decision-making responsibility, perhaps around 500. Statistical robustness, fascinatingly enough, happens or not, depending if you don't like data or not, happens about 400 respondents, regardless of the sample. What that means is at 400, that data will be accurate within plus or minus 3%. So that's the variance. And it won't get better than that if you increase the sample. So I could have 10,000 respondents. I could have 100,000 respondents. it'll still only be accurate between plus or minus 3%, which is the same as you'll get around 400 to 500.
That's actually reminded me of something that I wanted to put to Robin, if you don't mind, Will, which is there was two guys at LinkedIn, senior guys at LinkedIn, and they left based on, and this is something for you in your industry, on AI. Like back to bloody AI. And with this report is, it's found AI is big in marketing. Actually, in market research, there's two guys in AI and they were really senior and they left to set up a startup to use AI. And they fed data. I need to find out what company they are, and I will for the show notes. They set up a company and they fed the data of various sectors into AI and machine learning, and then now. And this has been tested predictively. They can do surveys with audiences, and it again back to your point that you've just given, it was within 3% of accuracy. Even though, so for instance, for this audience, you've done CMOs in the UK, right, from businesses of all different sizes and etc. That what they're saying is their data is robust to within 3%, but it's all AI audiences, which is fascinating to me. That's a threat, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a threat.
Or is it an efficiency?
It's an efficiency. Actually, it's an opportunity as well, if we're completely honest. There's not an awful lot I'm allowed to say. What I can say is within the last 7 days, we've had a meeting about how we might leverage that. I don't think it comes to replace opinion research based on the fact that you want to talk to the humans, especially the qual element. We want to talk to people like we are now. We want to talk to a marketer or a fund manager, give them the marketing and branding and go through it with them and learn about the colors they like or don't like, the text, the message, all the way through to the brand and the narrative that it's telling. I don't think you replace that, especially in the qual side. But even on the quant side, there's just something, there's an unease that comes from having a synthetic, they call the synthetic population to tell your story. Right?
Yeah.
Again, I think we get back to that place where you've just got synthetic AI, bit of market research, you've got an opposing one over here, and they're kind of locking horns in the middle. And by the end of it, no one cares because you've not asked anyone. You've literally not asked anyone. You've run it through a machine. It's a good model. It would be a great model for kind of political polling, I'd imagine, for assessing that on the lead up to elections. It'll be a good model for kind of brand understanding. But I don't think it can come to replace it. Our hope is that we can leverage it, that we can build it into our services, and maybe it's a cost-effective solution as well. I can't stand here and say that that's in play and it is cost-effective yet, but that's something that we're definitely considering. So I'm hoping it's an opportunity rather than a threat. I'd hate to think that all opinions are replaced by AI. That's definitely like singularity.
Yeah, because a synthetic audience for me, right? Because it makes sense that it can look and take all the factors into and understand the audience and come up with the scenario. But for me, it's like when you've got big sort of TV campaigns, right? Sometimes it's the unqualified, untangible, that's the word, that works for humans that wouldn't work logically. So that some of the best businesses have been created off unlogical decisions.
Like the meerkat.
Yeah,
there's no research in the world that would say people that want to save money on car insurance will engage with a toy meerkat.
Well, System Wonder would argue that actually having a character and an animal in particular increases your emotion and remembering your ad by at least a third.
I was discussing this with someone the other day. Do you remember the Cadbury's ad with that gorilla playing the drums to Phil Collins?
Phil Collins, yeah.
Then I suppose it's an animal. But I mean, that again, there's no research in the world that would suggest that's an appropriate route. I mean, other than using an animal and being memorable.
Yeah. And I think we do. I think we get to that situation where there are plenty of things that it could come to replace. It could replace conversation down the pub. I don't think anyone's electing to go and talk to like an AI chatbot whilst having your pint. So I think it will be a useful tool for some things. Definitely for, as I said, kind of predictive models. It might be a cost-effective solution, but I don't think it'll be picked up by journalists, at least in the foreseeable. Because it's just not it's not human enough, and you need to speak. That's part of good engaging content research, especially is making it engaging and human enough to relate to.
Which leads me to my next question, Robin. what percentage of this report was AI generated?
I think I can say 0%.
Wow.
All of the data collection, all of the data collection is how we do it normally. It's not manual, it's automated, but it's not AI driven. We have an in-house creative team of XPRs and marketers. They wrote the report. That copy was then checked internally. In terms of the creative of actually, I'm just going through it methodically to make sure that I go on record 100%.
In case someone challenges you on it.
Which I don't think
I've got ChatGPT flashing up here just saying, hang on a minute. No, and even like the themes, I think we decided on definitely AI, obviously, but skills and kind of customer happiness was decided on in the creative session that I was in. And I know for a fact there wasn't an AI leverage. So I can say 0%.
Impressive.
And I think we're going to want to keep it that way as well.
Because my question is this: AI loves a spreadsheet, so let's take all your data. What would be fascinating is if we took all your data, your raw data, and plugged it into an AI, saying write as a report, whether it would be better than the one that was done by the humans, because it was the same data. Would it be better or worse?
How do you quantify better?
You'd have to do a report to CMOs to ask them if it was better or not.
Yeah. It becomes very confusing, doesn't it?
I think we're still in that stage where there are some better tools than I think Gemini is better than ChatGPT.
True.
I think there's probably stuff that was better than Gemini. But I think we're still at a stage where I can spot a paragraph written by. Actually, we did test this, and forgive me, I don't have the results on me, but we tested it with consumers. Can you verify? Can you spot the one that's AI generated? I think with formal writing like this, I still back myself, and I think your audience, your listeners, I back them to spot something that is, non-human, kind of AI generated rather than copy. Because actually, the beauty of that is that they might go, "Oh, I'd have written that a bit differently." And that's the human aspect. That not being perfect.
What I'd love to see, we can share them in the show notes, but if you can, after the show, if you can send us the results of that study, that would be fascinating. I've got a final question from me, and there'll be people listening to this who are commissioning, have commissioned, are about to commission B2B research. And we've done it a load of times. And obviously it's, compared with consumer research, it's a significant investment, isn't it? So people need to get the most from it. What kind of 3 tips would you give B2B marketers that want to get the most from their, their B2B research project?
Work with me. No, I'm joking. Well, you can if you want. But actually, leading to work with a reputable organization. I think that's your bedrock. That's your foundation from which to work from. Research is only as good as the input. So you need to be sure that the company's reputation is in order. If it's going out to media, the journalists will look at that and go, yes, that's fine. That their processes in terms of data collection and recruitment are in play as well. So work with someone reputable. I think leverage your internal teams. We also have a creative team as well, but whoever you can to make sure the research is engaging and interesting and kind of puts a foot forward. Again, you don't want to just make noise if it's the same noise as that white paper that your competitor's doing and there's 3 more that have been produced or in production. You need to think for content research really carefully about how engaging it is, how relevant it is back to, being human and relatable. But it needs to be like genuinely interesting, insightful, not just, something that people already know and you've just put a bit of data behind it. I think thirdly, and this might be just a bit of gripe of mine, but it's actually really important to give yourself enough time to really fully plan a piece of research, to put in the legwork at the front end to ensure what I've just said. About making it engaging and interesting and insightful, having enough time to collect quality respondents rather than just hashing it out, and then having enough time to also do the engaging, insightful bit at the end, analyzing the data, leaving enough time for production and design if it's going into white papers, leaving enough time at both ends to talk to journalists about it. What would be interesting, and then we've got this report, it's interesting. So actually, giving yourself more time than not. And too often we see people not having enough time and kind of rushing it through.
Good insight. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I had a question about data science. Do you use data scientists in what you do then?
We don't use a data scientist in like the purest form, I guess. We have worked with companies and on projects where it's combined. So we'll give them some primary data, which is what we collect. They'll take some secondary data. They might also take big data. So if you think about, a payments company, a payment processor, they might get a load of financial spending from consumers from Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield. Data scientists can then work on that big data and put it into their tools to make sense of it, but they can also use our primary data. So I've been part of projects for companies that have leveraged the data scientist internally with our data, but we ourselves don't have one in-house. It's kind of surplus to requirements. We do have analysts, but I'd say it's a slightly different bucket from how we categorize. Anyway.
I only asked for a purely personal reason because my nephew is just about to qualify in data science and is actually doing an AI master's.
I would actually say on that, I think you mentioned, Will, that AI, you can go to Silicon Valley and say, write a number on a piece of paper and they'll pay it. I think data science is not a million miles away from it. I think the application of it is huge, and I think he or she won't find any issues in picking up a job.
Yeah, this guy said it was like, I think graduate salaries were $250,000 or $300,000 in Silicon Valley for someone with an AI degree. It's mental,
isn't it?
Retrain,
I think.
I know, that's what I was thinking. How quickly can I learn this stuff?
It's boring though, isn't it? Prompt engineering.
Probably, but you get to live in San Francisco, so.
Yeah.
Well, you probably need $250,000 to live there.
I know, exactly.
So, Robin, thanks for coming on the show. If people want to get hold of you, what's the best way that they can find you?
The best way to find me is LinkedIn, Robin Smith, Censuswide, or drop me an email, and that's just rob@Censuswide, CENSUSWIDE.com. And look, I'm very happy to talk about research at all times. It doesn't have to be a live project that you're considering. It can be as simple as, I don't really know a lot about research, but I've been told I need to do more. Look, get in touch. We do it for marketing, PR, and comms. We do it for measurement, and that's measurement of campaigns. How did this campaign perform and go, which we're doing an awful lot of. We do it for audience understanding, who's your customer, who are your personas that you're targeting, and how do you target them best? And we do it for, as I said, testing, whether that's brand health, or whether that's kind of live. I've got 3 adverts and I want to choose the best one. So those are the 4 kind of main areas we help with. I'm very happy to discuss anything and all things research within that.
And do you want to give people a heads up where they can find or read a copy of the CMO report as well? Because I'm sure people will want to have a look at it. We'll
put it in the show notes as well, I think, because we've talked about it extensively.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's also found on our website, so just simple as www.censuswide.com. We've actually gone through a slight rebrand. So it's nice and good colors and quite engaging. But as part of that, there's a little add-on and you can click on the report, download it nice and easy. It is an interesting read. As I said, we're hoping it gets more and more interesting, more and more engaging as we repeat it. We'll definitely engage you guys next year when we've done it again, and perhaps we can pick up on some of the stuff that we've mentioned in this one.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks.
Final question. Who would you recommend we speak to in terms of interviewing an interesting guest on this show?
I've worked with a woman called Miranda McLean. She's currently at eCompay. She used to be at Banking Circle. Good, just B2B marketing. We've done various projects on various things. We've kind of moved from PR and marketing research through into kind of more brand focused research at the moment. She's been a CMO for years. Lovely lady, and I'm sure she'd have interesting insights for you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great recommendation. Thanks for coming on the show, Robin. That was really interesting. Thanks for coming along. We'd love to see you next year and hear about what's changed, if anything. I'm sure, and hopefully it'll be. Can we have a real audience and a synthetic audience next year?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll actually be just like an emoji of my head and some computer voice. No, look, it's been a real pleasure to be on this and to talk to you guys and through the report, and very much look forward to doing it again.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, mate.